Hey everybody, welcome to Pit Stops to the Podium, the Rev Partners podcast where we talk to execs who have competed and won, accelerating their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Bridget, the co-founder and CEO of Rev Partners. I have with me today John Thackston for episode 2 of Pit Stops to the Podium. John is an expert in sales performance improvement. His company, SOAR Performance Group, is one of the leading sales consultancies helping companies make that switch from high growth to high scale. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me, Brendan. Really excited to be here.
Well, John, before we get into our big idea for the day, would love to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better. So how about you give us 3 fun facts about you?
Sounds great. So 3 fun facts about me. One is I have done business on every continent except Antarctica. The second is I'm not a particularly good golfer, but I've played at 23 out of the world's top 100 courses. And the third is that 2020 was the first year I have not been able to go to a University of Georgia football game in person. So since 1992. So I was on a solid 28-year streak there.
Well, in light of how the season went, it's probably a good thing you didn't go.
I think it worked out all right. But yeah, I actually was just reflecting on that and was like, that was the first year in 28 years I didn't go to a game. Like, that's pretty wild. So one more wild thing in a wild year.
That's a good fact. And, I was a little disappointed. I was hoping you might call out the fact that you and I went to high school together, but I won't hold that against you.
We did go to high school together. I was going to bring that up later, but I'm glad we're getting it out on the table. Yeah, this is the first podcast I've ever done with someone I also went to high school with. So this is a double winner for me.
Very good. Well, hey, in light of your experience and in light of the fact that you work with, companies big and small, and that idea of going from high growth to high scale, I thought it'd be really appropriate to talk about this big idea of how do you create predictable, repeatable results. So John, how about you walk us through what you've seen and what you can share with our listeners on that big topic?
For sure. And just some background for the audience about our firm. So we were started back in 2009, and we basically help organizations deal with the fact that buying is changing faster than selling. And the other big issue we help folks with is how do they put the right things in place in terms of strategy, people, and processes to get them to the next level in terms of business, especially as we talk about more of the scaling companies, because we have a mix of clients, the SAPs, the VMwares, the HPs of the world. And we also work with a lot of the world's fastest growing companies like the Seismic Softwares, the Recorded Futures, the Cobatons, Qgendas, a lot of really high growth companies, unicorn types of companies. And so a couple things when I think about just big challenges in moving from high growth to high scale and creating predictable, repeatable results. The biggest challenge that we see is actually alignment. And alignment is one of those words, I think, especially that early employees and founders hate because it feels like a waste of time because they're like, no, we don't have time to align about anything. We have to build the product and sell the product. But actually, when we look at organizations that we work with, that's one of the biggest things that makes a huge difference. And are you able to go from high growth to high scale is, do you have alignment? And when we talk about alignment, there's a few different directions there. One is when everybody thinks about alignment, they think about more like the internal alignment or like the cross-functional alignment. And I think there's actually an important part of that comes first, which is like, are you aligned with your market and with your buyers? Which I think that's like the most critical foundation, and not just where your buyers are today, but where they're going as your company evolves. Yeah, it's an old book and it's a simple book, but if you think about the book Crossing the Chasm, where you're talking about, are we selling to early adopters? Are we selling to the pragmatic buyers? Are we selling to the late majority? Are we selling to the laggards? Yeah, that makes a huge difference in how we approach things. So the first piece around alignment is really understanding, are we in alignment with our market and like where our market's going and where our buyers are? And the next piece when we talk about alignment is really about, as a team, are we aligned in 2 things? One is, are we aligned in the game we're playing? So like, do we have a strategy and are we aligned on the game we're playing? And secondly, do we have a plan to win that game? And is everybody on the same page about the game we're playing? And do we have a plan to win that game? And that translates both within departments. Like, do we have a really strong kind of strategy and playbook within, marketing, within sales, within customer success or account management? And do we have good alignment across each of those functions that helps us maximize kind of our customer experience, our customer lifetime value?
That's great. Yeah. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And then, so those are some of, when you talk about alignment, what do you see with internal department, thinking about sales specifically? We talk about external, but what about internal?
For sure. I think there's a couple different pieces. If you think about, we really work kind of across both marketing, sales, and customer success. But if you think specifically about sales, there's kind of two pieces. One is, do we have a good understanding of who really buys from us, why they buy, what they care about, and do we have a repeatable process around how we find those folks and then convert them into customers? And is that something that we can scale as we add more people to it? In the early days of high growth, a lot of times you have what we see is, folks maybe have 8, 10, 12 reps, 2 or 3 of those are pretty good. The rest are kind of okay, not great. But as you really start to talk about scaling, you've got to have a way that the middle of your bell curve, you can start to move up because you have a predictable process and you have a consistent playbook. One of the big things when you talk about scale is early on, people just kind of figure it out, and you've got a good product, you're in a good market, you've got smart people, they figure it out. When you jump from 5, 10 reps to 50 to 75, you're not going to hire 75 of those people that can just go and figure it out. So getting super clear about what is it we need to do to win, the game we're playing, what game are we playing, what is it we need to do to win that game? And then do we have the right processes, the right playbook, and do we understand the right people to put into that system? And maybe the most critical part of that is, do we have the right leaders that understand how to make that happen?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a natural segue into one of the last questions I had for you, which is, what are the 3 biggest growth opportunities that you see for scaling companies? And maybe conversely, and you're kind of talking about it already, but like, what are the things that some companies aren't doing? But what would be your recommendation or advice for those companies that are starting to experience that hockey stick type growth? They found product market fit and they're starting to see that up into the right type momentum.
It's a really good question. I think I'll maybe talk about the 3 opportunities. Maybe the 3 most underappreciated opportunities are the ones that I see organizations miss the most often. So one is, I see a lot of organizations that over rotate. If you think about kind of 3 V's around pipeline, there's volume, there's velocity, and there's value. So there's how much volume's in the pipeline, there's how fast is it moving, and there's like what's kind of the average deal value. One of the mistakes that I see a lot of organizations make is they over rotate on volume and velocity, and they end up not optimizing for what is their average ARR, average ACV per opportunity. And that's oftentimes low-hanging fruit, especially as you're starting to scale, because those are opportunities that are already in the pipeline. And if you can crank the value of those up, you have a chance to really actually accelerate that growth rate. But a lot of folks focus on volume and velocity. So I think that's one kind of missed opportunity. The second missed opportunity I see with a lot of organizations that are kind of entering into that hockey stick phase is customer success and sales alignment. Especially when you're growing a lot, I think people get really focused on landing new accounts and getting them implemented. And it's sticky and it's kind of hard and messy to figure out how do we grow existing accounts. But a lot of times there's actually a lot of leverage that you can drive out of existing accounts, but it's not the dominant thought process when you're early on in that scaling. And so I think if you start thinking about that a little bit earlier, that can actually help accelerate your trajectory. And I think the third thing I see that is maybe an underappreciated opportunity is hard or complex verticals. A lot of times, I think, especially when you're early on, people shy away from potentially verticals they perceive are hard or complicated. And, just to give some like real tangible examples, things like financial services, government, healthcare, potentially. And sometimes as folks shy away from those, they actually can slow down a little bit their trajectory because those are all big markets, depending on what your solution set is. And one of the things I see with early companies is sometimes they say, hey, we don't want to go after this vertical because it's hard, it's complicated to sell into, it's hard to service. And I think that's oftentimes an underappreciated opportunity that prevents people from going as fast as they might like.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, what's your recommendation for those earlier stage companies when you think about focus? How do you balance that idea of focus within kind of find your niche, get rich concept versus like, hey, let's throw a dart at the dartboard and figure out where we'll have success and then we focus? I mean, what have you seen be successful within that, or what would be your recommendation?
I think it's two things. So one is, a couple simple things. One is you can't throw a dart at everything, but it's pretty good. One of the things that I see that is important is thinking a couple steps ahead about where your growth will come from in the future. And, thinking through, one of the things that we see is that you do have to start somewhere. And whether that's you're going to start in a department, for example, and then scale to enterprise, or maybe that's you're going to start in a vertical, then move to another vertical, and maybe it's you're going to start with a very specific workflow or a specific problem. I think that the important thing is to focus on something that allows you to then expand what you're doing over time if you really want to scale, or to decide, hey, we're going to solve a very specific problem in a very specific way. And, maybe our TAM is lower, but we're just going to go after that and really be great at it. I think it's just about making a choice, right? Do you want to scale and become a huge company? If you want to become a huge company, you're either going to have to solve a really big problem, or you're going to have to solve the same problem for a huge number of people, or, you have to step back and say, hey, we can solve this one problem in this one way, but maybe our TAM isn't as high. And so it's just a trade-off you have to make about, what's the funding, what's the resourcing required, and, what kind of company do you want to be?
That makes sense. Well, John, I really appreciate you giving some time to help us think through how to create predictable, repeatable results. If our audience wants to learn more about you or learn more about SOAR, what are the best ways in which they can engage with you?
For sure. So our website is SOAR, SOAR, performancegroup.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me at jonthackston@soarperformancegroup.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for your time. I know our audience appreciated it, and let's keep selling.